Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last highlights session of day 3. In this session, we'll just go through the 4 workshops we had and give you a short overview of what has happened. The speakers kindly joined us and they will go through that in 5 minutes. So next slide, please. So the first feedback comes from Bomwa. That's a tough one, Bomwa. You have to pronounce it yourself. So it's from the African Circular Economy Alliance. It's about framing an Africa-wide circular economy action plan. So please, Bomwa, I give you the floor for the next 5 minutes.
Thanks, Matthias. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Bonwa Fangwa. I'm the program manager for the African Circular Economy Alliance Secretariat. And the title of the workshop we had this afternoon was on defining an Africa-wide circular economy action plan. And the aim of the workshop was just basically to be a first of many peer exchanges that would inform us and also kind of set the stage for developing an action plan for the circular economy on the African continent. The idea was jointly created by the Alliance Secretariat and the Ghanaian Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation, which is one of the hosts of the WRF this year. This is an important dialogue for the Alliance as circular economy presents a huge opportunity for the African continent. And so we had it was a closed door workshop, even though attendees could look at it, could view it online. But I mean, the aim was to have like a high level dialogue of different organizations, key regional organizations within the continent, like the African Union Commission, the AMCEN, which is the African Ministerial Conference of the Environment, the African Standardization Organization, and one of the strategic partners of the Alliance, which is the African Circular Economy Network, which is basically a network of practitioners. And one key participant at the workshop was also the representatives of the member countries of the Alliance. As we all know, the Alliance is a government-led coalition of African nations. So also, the AUC and the AMCEN have initiatives ongoing, continental initiatives, the Green Recovery Action Plan and the African Green Stimulus Program that basically just provide a framework for the recognition and promotion of the circular economy as a sustainable development model that is especially useful in the recovery post-COVID-19. And we all understand and all agree that that is very key considering the impact that has had on the African continent. And so for us, we felt it's pertinent to go in that conversation, considering the AUC also has an expert working group for circular economy to pull that action plan together. So as part of the workshop, we had Astrid Shoemaker, the Director on Global Sustainable Development from the European Commission, give an intervention based on the experience of the European Union in developing their Circular Economy Action Plan that was launched sometime last year. And the action plan's aim is to accelerate and scale up transition to a circular economy, which we thought is relevant considering the aspirations of the continent at the moment. And so some highlights from our workshop was drawing out lessons from the experience in the EU. I'm not sure how much time I have left, but I mean, some of the core lessons we took away from that workshop was that we should not make the mistake they made in the first instance, where they just focus on the ministries of environment. It's supposed to be an all-inclusive process involving different ministries, different stakeholders like the private sector, academia, and rest in coming up with those action plans. And so, because I mean, circular economy is a journey not just for the Ministry of Environment or the environmental sector, but I mean, the benefits cuts across the whole, in trying to achieve development strides, cuts across different stakeholders. And also in one key lesson was in terms of drawing funding and financing from public and private sector sources for the circular economy process, which is really important. And alongside drawing our funding, there should be incentives for people that are doing good, that are for best practices, using standards such as EPR and the rest. And the last core lesson we took away was the need for baseline measurements, which we know very well is missing on the African continent, trying to draw out matrices and even data for setting the base to be able to report on progress for the circular economy. So those were the key takeaways, and we had the representatives from the African Commission, from the African member states, make comments on what is going on in their various countries and how those lessons can be drawn from the EU into Africa. I mean, there's opportunities for North-South collaboration for knowledge and technology transfer. So yeah, in short, yeah, it was a rich conversation. But I mean, if I were to give a summary, yeah, this is what I would focus on. So thanks, guys, and have a good day.
Thank you, Bonwa. That was a nice feedback. It sounds like a perfect exchange between EU and Africa. Just let me show the next slide, where we see that we're actually heading into the next feedback, also circular economy workshop on policy and business solutions to e-waste challenges in Africa. And we'll have Alexander and Joost who will be presenting for us. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Matthias. I would say positive messages and overall optimism is what summarizes the forward-looking discussions we had earlier today about the circular economy solutions to the e-waste challenge. And I would like to thank both our speakers and participants, mostly for bringing in confidence when addressing this huge problem for Africa, European Union, and the world. I found quite encouraging the speech the discussion and what was brought forward by Carla Montesi, who is the European Commission Director for the Green Deal and the Digital Agenda. Carla highlighted the commitment, and that was a clear commitment of the EU for a concrete agenda to achieve sustainability goals in key value chains. And among these key value chains is electronics and ICT. At the policy level with the Circular Economy Action Plan and the Sustainable Products Initiative, but also at the level of financing and implementation with the European Fund for Sustainable Development and with projects on the ground in partnership with African stakeholders. We also had some inspiring messages coming from Professor Rosemont Buhine. She's a coordinator of the EU-funded Imagine Ghana project. Rosemont stressed the need for inclusion of the informal sector. That's a crucial point, including the informal sector and formalizing whenever possible the informal actors in the promotion of a circular economy for electronics. Professor Buhene reported from her project experience. It's important to say that. And she stressed the need for awareness raising and capacity building, the latter being essential elements of a solution. While we got a geographically broader perspective of these solutions by Michel Govender, South Africa's Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. Michel Govender stressed the importance of standards, but at the same time, she recognized that solutions to the e-waste challenge are not restricted to national borders. As a member of the African Circular Economy Alliance, the ASEA, South Africa supports regional approaches for circular economy awareness, for example, in the ICT, in electronics and beyond. And then we'll come to money. Money was the keyword mentioned by Joost de Kluijver, director of Closing the Loop, referring obviously to value opportunities within circular electronic value chains. But better not me saying this because Joost is here with us now. So I leave the floor to you, Joost, to give us firsthand your impressions from the discussion.
Thanks for that. I can be really short. I'll not just use one word, although it is indeed an important one. Money was definitely a topic in the discussion. But I think also the topic of action, because what we've seen, and again, thanks to the organizers for really creating that mix in this panel, that there is clearly the need of politicians looking at this topic, researchers, academics, NGOs, of course, doing their bit. But if we want to act today, and clearly the topic of e-waste is also about creating results on a very short term, there is a good role for the business to play. And business, if we like it or not, acts if there's opportunity, if there's value to be created. So one of the biggest elements that we discussed also in this session is what type of business models would be available are available, and most of all, how can we scale business models? Because by scaling business models, we attract business, and business definitely on the short term has a huge opportunity to add to the global challenge of e-waste, or a little bit differently perhaps, change the topic of e-waste from just a problem into also an opportunity. But again, thanking indeed also the other speakers, and repeating also the words of the EU Commissioner, EU Lady Carla Montasani, was we all need to scale up our activity. Clearly that's the case, but please do not forget also the role for business. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, Joost. Sounded like a very rich workshop with a lot of good speakers. We are very grateful also to the EC for the organization of this. I think this enriched a lot the discussion as well. So let me go to the next speaker. We had a workshop on a financing roundtable, unlocking a plastic circular economy in Ghana. Now, I hope with Clem we have the right speaker, because I saw something in the chat that others wanted to join, but I think Clem, you will talk about this roundtable. Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct. Thank you, Matthias. We had a very rich conversation on the issue of unlocking a plastic circular economy in Ghana, with a specific focus on the financing. And on our table, on our panel was represented the World Bank Group, the IFC, the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, and the European Investment Bank. So a panel of 4 speakers. We had 2 keynote addresses by the country director for World Bank in Ghana, and the special advisor to the Ministry of Environment in Ghana. I think the keynote addresses preceded the panel conversation, and it focused on the level of collaboration that the Ghanaian government is building across sectors: the private sector, the civil society sector, the donor community, as well as the informal sector, bringing everyone together under the platform of the Ghana National Plastic Action Partnership, which was set up by the Global Plastics Action Partnership to create a multi-stakeholder platform for collaboration and alignment on, the key policies, the key initiatives that are required to make progress. And we understand that Ghana has been able to create a national baseline for plastic flows, which then enables the country to know in data terms the volume of plastics that are available in Ghana, from production to consumption to waste generation. What are the plastic hotspots, and how can they be collected? So that's a very important piece of tool that wasn't available previously. The second thing is also through the MPAP platform as well. Ghana has developed a national action roadmap, for plastics, which was created in a multi-stakeholder forum and aligned by stakeholders across sectors. And this gives a strategic roadmap, to 2040 on the different interventions, the different initiatives that need to be taken in order to solve the plastic waste pollution challenge in Ghana. Now, the work that is currently ongoing within the same platform is the financing roadmap, which is bringing together international banks, regional banks, as well as local banks in Ghana with the stakeholders in the plastic sector to discuss how can the opportunities within the plastic waste sector be unlocked. How can the sector be de-risked in order to make it attractive for financing, both from a development financing perspective as well as, from local commercial banking financing as well. And I think that is a very critical work, that would, help to implement the roadmap that has been developed. A couple of things came up in the conversation, and I think the first thing is the question of what are we going to do with plastic waste? As we know, Ghana in particular, and of course, the region is not very industrialized. And what that means is that there are very limited opportunity for large-scale use of plastic waste. That was identified as a critical challenge in making progress, because I think currently almost about 70% of plastics collected in Ghana, and by extension on the continent, are exported. And we know that the export window is not a viable opportunity, especially with, the challenges around, plastic importation, both in Southeast Asia as well as, in Europe, which are the primary destinations for collected plastics in Africa. So the question then becomes, what is Africa and Ghana specifically going to do with the plastic waste that has been collected? Now that led to, the conversation around, the need to invest in infrastructure for recycling, the need to invest in infrastructure for collection and sorting to ensure that plastics do not end up in the landfill and the dump sites, where they get contaminated and become even more expensive to recycle. And so point of use collection, was emphasized. The other thing is also around, investment in R&D. Okay, how can we create new products that are locally relevant and affordable for plastic waste in order to ensure that plastic continues to remain in the loop, and as well as, the financing that is expected from the finance sector. How can the industry itself, particularly the user industries, the brand owners, the packaging companies, how can Ghana create an effective EPR policy that ensures that, players within the sector can take responsibility and also make, financial contributions that can enable, sustainable and, large-scale collection and recycling of plastics in the country. The other conversation that was very interesting is also around the question of, the inertia, that was discussed by several of the speakers, and there are several pain points. For instance, the EPR policy, has been not much progress has been achieved over the last 10 years that many of the countries, have been discussing EPR policy. And so the question is, what exactly is responsible for this inertia? Okay, is it the lack of political will by the government? Is it the lack of capacity by the regulators? Is it the lack of interest, by the industry? And I think at the end, it was agreed that it's a combination of all of these factors. First, you have governments, who want to implement an EPR policy but do not understand how to go about it. Now, they've been able to get guidance from some development partners, but even at that, the political will to ensure that this goes through and the regulatory capacity to design, a system that can work for the country and also be able to enforce it, is a big challenge. And so that is one of the areas of inertia that needs to be dealt with. The other thing is around also, and sorry, now as a result of that, there were some very interesting conversations around, so what's responsible? One of the, some of the reasons given by the World Bank, from their engagement with both the private sector and the public sector, is the fact that, there is the concern by the private sector, and by private sector we mean the large players, within the sector, that there is not a fair ground, for the EPR implementation, because the majority of players, are in the informal sector, many of whom are not trackable and do not appear in the system. They don't, from a tax perspective, from the perspective of bringing them into the loop within an EPR system is going to be very difficult. And so the burden is going to be on the few big players, to be able to carry that. And as a result of that, there is reluctance by these big players, to drive the EPR implementation. The second thing is around the lack of data. Okay, there is no visibility around the data in terms of plastic footprint and plastic output, and it's going to be very difficult to do that, without having, the data to guide that that decision. The other conversation is around also the issue of the reuse of plastics. For instance, in Ghana and in many of the African countries, except Nigeria and Mauritius, there is no regulatory approval for the use of recycled plastics for food grade application. So what that means is that companies cannot even use bottle to bottle, recycled products, because the standards are not there, because the approvals are not there. And those are, that's also another area that needs to be dealt with. And I think in conclusion, there was a consensus that we can't wait for a perfect system, before the EPR can be implemented, because that's going to take a lot of years. But that, we can adopt the 2080 principle, which means, you look at the big players, start with them, and then create a process, for evolving the system to cover all other players in the industry. So these are the highlights of the conversation. And I think we all agree that some of these issues, would need to be discussed in greater detail. And I think there is an arrangement to ensure that, we can reconvene and take this forward, especially within the financing, roadmap framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. It seems like all of this workshop really deserve more time to discuss, and I hope this is a good starting point to put things forward. So let's move to the next one. That's the last presentation that's given by Alexander Graf from the Resourcing Project, Vienna University, about the global definition for responsible sourcing.
Thanks, Matthias. As you just said, we had our short workshop on the question of a global definition for responsible sourcing, which was organized by the Resourcing Project. The Resourcing Project is a 4-year project funded by the European Commission and is aimed at establishing a multi-stakeholder platform for responsible sourcing in mineral value chains, more specifically in 3 value chains or industry sectors that are key to the green transition agenda, such as the European Green Deal, namely renewable energy, mobility, and also the electronic sector. And as I said already in the workshop itself, this session or our session was intended mainly to start or open a discussion in a rather informal setting on this topic of a kind of common understanding for responsible sourcing, as this is actually a topic that will follow us in the Resourcing Project for about the next 2 years as one major part. The starting point then was also basically for this question of a global definition of responsible sourcing in our workshop, the diversity of different perspectives, interests, and resulting approaches and practices when it comes to responsible sourcing of raw materials. And we try to approach this question in our workshop mainly from 3 different angles, namely, what are the main objectives to practice or pursue responsible sourcing, why responsible sourcing and what for? Second, what are systems and processes on how to deliver on responsible sourcing? And lastly, also what are the main kind of actors, the most important stakeholders able to deliver on responsible sourcing. Unfortunately, time was also rather short on our side, so we have been only able to discuss the first 2. Nonetheless, it was actually a very rich discussion we had with already kind of very few clear kind of statements that may help us to identify the direction where to go to when it comes to a common definition or understanding of responsible sourcing. So starting with the first, objectives of responsible sourcing, we tried to bring in different perspectives here, covering civil society, business, and policy. And it was agreed that kind of the main starting point would, of course, be first and foremost, most urgently, to address kind of the prevention or address kind of human rights and environmental issues, and mainly kind of prevent negative impact, both in terms of human rights violations and environmental issues, as I just said. However, more than just these kind of basic risk management and prevention of negative kind of impact, it is also about, or what was kind of identified as being important was that we need certain standards of conduct on the side of businesses, and even more so also the duty to care also about the people and the impact we have upon them. When we then turned a bit more to the policy side and the ambition and objectives, for example, when it comes to EU regulations, such as the conflict mineral regulation or the upcoming due diligence law, it was very interesting to see that, of course, again, it is about leaving no one behind, leaving no person, no place behind. But in addition, then there came also in this topic of resilience. So an additional interest accompanied, particularly on the EU level, through strategies such as the Critical Raw Materials Action Plan or also the Battery Action Plan. Then moving on perhaps also to the business perspective, it was very interesting to hear from Liesl and her experience in the mining, Liesl Pulling and her experience in the mining sector from SRK Consulting. The transition actually, how actually responsible sourcing started mainly as a compliance activity, maybe triggered or dictated by the policy sphere, then moved on to something that we could call perhaps something like business consciousness, simply to say, well, responsible sourcing is the right thing to do. And now further transitioned actually over the last 10 to 15 years to much more the question of how to really create value and how to create value also on a local level for local communities in the form of perhaps local procurement or local supply chains. And the keyword she mentioned in this regard was then actually something like value equity. So creating not just value for the mining companies and the industry itself, but really also for the local communities. And what was interesting in this regard was then also that actually this kind of value equity also becomes more and more a business case in itself, as we have seen, for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, where local supply chains actually turned out to be often more resilient than international ones. Perhaps then going to the second theme very quickly, the kind of processes and systems. I think two messages stuck out there, which I would like to briefly just summarize very quickly. One was, well, we do not need any more kind of processes, systems. In that sense, we have enough of them. It's about harmonizing them and implementing the existing ones. And the second message that we had when it came to the processes and systems was that it is definitely preferable to follow a mandatory approach. Why? Both in order to achieve impact and also to create a level playing field for the different players and actors, which then scales the adoption of responsible sourcing. Kind of an inspiring last statement by all speakers was, in the end, what is the most important ingredient in order to arrive at something like a global common understanding of responsible sourcing? Well, simply said, talk to each other, get together, and equally also listen to each other. And this was rather inspiring because it is also at the core of our project, the resourcing project, which we will definitely follow up also in the future. Thanks. That's it from our side.
Thank you very much, Alexander, and thank you everybody who gave us these highlights